This is the idealized equation governing the two-body gravitational problem. It comes from two facts Newton already knew. Gravity pulls two masses together, and force equals mass times acceleration. Combine the two, cancel out the planet's mass, and you get the physical law governing the system. And at first glance, it looks solvable. You have one unknown function, the planet's position as it changes through time. The rest are just known constants. A high school student would look at this and think, easy, just isolate r. But that r double dot on the left, that's not a number. It's the second derivative of the planet's position with respect to time. It's the rate of change of the rate of change of the position. In other words, the position isn't just sitting neatly on the right side as a value, it's secretly hiding on the left side too, trapped inside its own derivative. You can't factor it out, you can't divide by it. Every algebraic move you try just spits out more derivatives, or more fractions. Standard algebra simply has no next step. This was the absolute boundary of known mathematics, and the tools Newton forged to cross it would fundamentally rewrite how we describe the physical world. The algebra most of us learn in school is built to find unknown values. You write an equation, manipulate both sides, and eventually isolate the unknown. That works perfectly, as long as your unknown is a static value. For example, what's the x-coordinate where this line crosses that one? What speed produces this kinetic energy? Those are number problems. But Newton's gravity equation doesn't have a number as its unknown. The unknown is a function, the full trajectory of a planet across all of time, not just where it is right now, but its exact position at any moment you choose to look. And functions don't behave like numbers. You can't isolate them the same way. Take dy by dx equals y. What function is its own derivative? The answer is e to the x. But no amount of algebraic rearranging will ever give you that. You have to stop asking, what number satisfies this? And start asking, what function satisfies this? That single shift is the entire conceptual leap of differential equations. Newton made that leap in 1665. He was just 22 years old. The plague had shut down Cambridge, and he had gone home to Wools Thorpe, with nothing but time and a problem he couldn't let go of. Newton didn't call this differential equations. He called it the method of fluxions. Any quantity changing over time, like position or temperature, was a fluent. The instantaneous rate it was changing was its fluxion. In modern terms, the fluent is the function, and the fluxion is the derivative. He aimed this idea directly at gravity. He already had his inverse square law. The sun's pull drops off with the square of the distance. He also had his second law, force equals mass times acceleration. Combine them, and you get a strict mathematical relationship between motion and changing acceleration. Then he asked a question nobody had asked before. He relied on geometry rather than the algebra we use today. But his core objective was exactly the same. What specific path through space naturally obeys this rule of changing acceleration? To answer that, he had to invent entirely new math. Before Newton, astronomers had Kepler's laws. After years of fitting curves to observational data from Mars, Kepler concluded in 1609 that planets move in ellipses, not circles. But that conclusion was purely empirical. Kepler had no idea why the shape was an ellipse. He only knew that it matched the observations. Newton showed that the ellipse wasn't a coincidence at all. It was a mathematical necessity. An inverse square force produces a family of curves called conic sections, and bound orbits turn out to be ellipses. By following how motion changes under gravity, Newton showed that the complicated behavior of planets follows from a surprisingly simple underlying rule. Kepler's elliptical orbits emerge naturally from Newton's differential equation. They don't need to be observed first and then curve-fitted. They're a consequence of the mathematics, and that's what makes differential equations so powerful. You write down a rule describing how a system changes, and the geometry of its behavior emerges from the mathematics itself. But before we go any further, it's worth asking what a differential equation actually is. A differential equation doesn't give you coordinates, it gives you rules of motion. To understand the general idea, let's look at a simpler first-order differential equation. Imagine a grid of thousands of tiny arrows across a plane. At every single point, the equation calculates the exact direction a path must take. The equation is the field of arrows. The solution is a continuous curve that threads perfectly through them. But there is no single solution. There's an infinite family of them. The specific curve your system follows is locked in by the initial conditions. Where was the planet at time 0? How fast was it moving? The equation gives you the rules. The initial conditions tell you where you started. Together, they determine everything. Newton's success with two bodies was extraordinary, but he immediately tried to extend it. Add a third body, say the sun, the earth, and the moon, and the problem changes completely. Now every body is being pulled by the other two at the same time. The result isn't one differential equation. It's a coupled system of equations. The position of each body affects the forces on the other two, which affect their positions, which affect the forces, in a continuous cycle. Newton tried for years to extend his success. He developed what he called lunar theory, a framework of successive approximations for the moon's orbit. It explained much of the moon's motion. But one problem refused to yield: the precession of the lunar apsides, the slow rotation of the moon's elliptical orbit over time. Newton's calculations came tantalizingly close, yet the numbers never quite matched the sky. His biographer David Brewster recorded that Newton's friend Edmund Halley used to press Newton to complete his lunar theory, and Newton would always reply that thinking about it made his head ache and kept him awake at night. He refused to engage with it anymore. The man who invented the mathematical framework for describing motion never found a complete solution for three bodies interacting under his own laws. And that raises a deeper question. If Newton's laws could explain the motion of planets so beautifully, why did adding just one more body make the problem so difficult? The answer wasn't obvious. In fact, for decades, mathematicians were still learning how to work with the new framework that Newton had created. One of the people who pushed that framework furthest was Leonhard Euler. If Newton gave mathematicians a language for describing change, Euler taught them how to use it. Newton had shown that the laws of nature could be written as differential equations, but writing down an equation and solving it are two very different things. The challenge was always the same. Given a rule describing how something changes, how do you recover the function itself? Euler's breakthrough was to stop treating every differential equation as a unique puzzle. Instead, he began developing systematic methods, techniques that could solve entire families of equations. And one of the most powerful of those methods begins with a deceptively simple equation. This equation shows up everywhere: a spring pulled and released, a pendulum swinging through small angles. What it's saying is surprisingly simple. The acceleration of the object is proportional to its displacement, but in the opposite direction. Pull it to the right, and it accelerates to the left. Pull it further away, and the restoring force becomes stronger. Before Euler, Equations like this were often solved through geometric arguments, intuition, or inspired guesswork. Euler wanted something more systematic. His key insight was that certain functions behave especially well under differentiation. Differentiate them once, twice, or 10 times, and they keep essentially the same form. The exponential function is the most important example, so Euler assumed a solution of the form x of t equals e raised to the power lambda t. He didn't know what lambda was yet. In fact, that was the whole point. The exact value didn't matter. The shape of the solution did. Differentiate once, the derivative of x with respect to t equals lambda times e raised to the power lambda t. Differentiate again, the second derivative of x with respect to t equals lambda squared times e raised to the power lambda t. Now substitute that back into the original equation, lambda squared times e raised to the power lambda t equals minus k over m times e raised to the power lambda t. And something remarkable happens. The exponential appears on both sides. Since e raised to the power lambda t is never zero, it can be divided away completely. What's left is lambda squared plus k over m equals 0. Look at what just happened. A differential equation, a calculus problem, has been transformed into a polynomial equation, and polynomial equations are something algebra already knows how to solve. This new equation is called the characteristic equation. Lambda equals plus or minus I times the square root of k over m. The roots are imaginary. And that turns out to be the key to understanding why systems like springs and pendulums oscillate at all. This is Euler's formula. If you've seen it before, you might know it as a beautiful connection between the exponential function, trigonometry, and the imaginary unit. But for differential equations, it's much more than a curiosity. It's the reason oscillation appears at all. A moment ago, the characteristic equation gave us the roots. Lambda equals plus or minus I omega, where omega is the square root of k over m. That means the exponential solution becomes e raised to plus or minus I omega t. And Euler's formula tells us exactly what those exponentials look like. The imaginary roots haven't produced something exotic. They've produced sine and cos waves. Combine the two roots, and the full real-valued solution becomes x of t equals a cosine omega t plus b sine omega t, where a and b are determined by the initial position and velocity. And suddenly, the physics appears. The pendulum swings, the spring bounces. None of that was assumed. It emerged directly from the mathematics. The characteristic equation produced imaginary roots. Euler's formula transformed those roots into sine and cos waves, and sine and cos waves are oscillations. That's the deeper lesson. The roots of the characteristic equation don't just solve the mathematics. They tell you how the physical system behaves. If the roots are imaginary, the system oscillates. If they're real and negative, the motion dies away. If they're real and positive, it grows without bound. This is what made Euler's method so powerful. A question about motion becomes a question about roots. And roots are something algebra knows how to handle. But there's a catch. This elegant trick only works for linear equations, the well-behaved ones, and the universe is rarely that cooperative. Newton's three-body problem didn't remain unsolved forever. 2 centuries later, Henri Poincaré took up the challenge. What he discovered turned out to be even more unsettling than Newton's original failure. In 1885, the King of Sweden offered a prize for resolving the n-body problem, proving whether the solar system is stable or whether planets could eventually be ejected into deep space. Poincaré submitted a 200-page memoir and won. But before it could be published, an editorial assistant named Lars Fragmen noticed a subtle error. When Poincaré went back to correct it, he realized the mistake wasn't minor at all. Fixing it didn't salvage the proof, it overturned the conclusion. What emerged from that correction is now known as the Homoclinic Tangle. To understand why it matters, imagine the phase space of a three-body system, a geometric space where each axis represents one of the system's variables. Within that space are structures called stable and unstable manifolds. Poincaré initially believed these curves reconnected smoothly, forming boundaries that confined motion to predictable regions. They don't. Instead, they intersect. And once they intersect, they do so again and again, folding over themselves in an endlessly intricate pattern. Inside that tangled structure, tiny differences in starting conditions grow over time. Two trajectories that begin almost indistinguishably close can eventually separate completely, leading to dramatically different futures. Poincaré paid the correction and reprinting costs out of his own pocket. The bill came to 3,500 kroner, more than the 2,500 kroner prize he had won. What he uncovered was something profoundly new. Deterministic equations can produce behavior whose long-term evolution depends exquisitely on initial conditions. Not because the laws are uncertain, not because the mathematics is incomplete, but because the equations themselves amplify even the smallest imprecision. To predict the distant future perfectly, you would need perfect knowledge of the present, and perfect precision is impossible. This is what we now call chaos. The equations remain completely deterministic, yet over long enough timescales, their behavior becomes effectively unpredictable. The three-body problem revealed something unsettling. Writing down a differential equation doesn't guarantee that you can solve it. In fact, most nonlinear differential equations resist exact solutions entirely. Physicists and engineers usually rely on numerical approximations, step-by-step calculations that trace the future one small interval at a time. For many systems, that's enough. But for chaotic systems, even tiny errors eventually grow, and prediction breaks down. That equation from the beginning of this video looks small enough to fit on a t-shirt. Yet hidden inside it are planetary orbits, the limits of prediction, and one of the deepest discoveries in mathematics, that a universe governed by precise laws can still remain beyond our ability to foresee. 4 centuries after Newton, differential equations remain our most powerful language for describing change. And some of their most important questions are still unanswered.